this is Jamie Hadfield with Legends Health, Wellness, and Performance. Today I have Steve Ottersberg. Okay, with Botanica Technica.
Botanica.
Oh my goodness, I messed it up. Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great to see you.
Yes, great to see you. Okay, now you are by training a
drug design chemist.
Okay, and how did we specifically get into the cannabis industry?
Well, I was born into the cannabis industry.
Okay, tell us more. Tell us more.
So I grew up in Pueblo, Colorado. I'm youngest of 10 kids, and being youngest of 7 boys, chances are that one of them was going to grow marijuana. Well, it turns out it wasn't me, but one of my older brothers he has a master's in horticulture and a master's in biochemistry, and the two went really well to growing the best weed Colorado ever saw in the 70s.
Fun. It sounds like a fun teenage years.
Yeah, I mean, so by the time I was in 7th grade, I knew what Sinsemilla was. And I understood, light and dark cycles. And part of that is because I grew up working at Campbell's Flowers, a big commercial greenhouse in Pueblo. And we grew roses and chrysanthemums and all the bedding plants that people plant in their gardens. And so I got to learn about light depth by growing chrysanthemums as a kid.
Wow.
Yeah, and so, the other thing is, in my family, I'm just one of a handful of scientists. Just about every one of my brothers and sisters is in some branch of science.
Okay, so let's talk about specifically your science background, because that will lead into the cannabis industry. So let's hear about your background.
Well, and I have to laugh because, so I did my undergrad training at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado, and I focused on biochemistry, and I fell in love with natural products. And I ended up going to grad school at Arizona State. And at Arizona State, I focused on cancer drug design, which weirdly enough was parallel with my work with terpenes today.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Really,
and the weird thing about cancer drug design from the perspective we were looking at is every drug that we designed that worked in the lab, I did enzyme assays. So I pre-qualified drug candidates for cell line testing, because back then in the late 90s, cell line testing was the first step into qualification of a drug candidate. The progression goes cell line testing, mouse testing, rat testing, canine, primate, then human.
Yes.
And at the time, it was the beginning of combinatorial synthesis. And combinatorial synthesis is a method of creating massive libraries of drug candidates. So in the late 90s, there were these massive libraries of drug candidates and no way to qualify them. And so our angle in grad school was we pre-qualified our small library by using an enzyme assay that I developed. And so that enzyme assay, it focused our drug development into molecules that looked like limonene. One of my favorite terpenoids, probably your favorite terpenoid too. And everybody knows limonene, right?
No, I don't know if a lot of people do. There is so much to learn in the space that I feel like most scientists, for most people in the medical field, but I know a lot of physicians that wouldn't even know what you mean by that term.
Well, physicians. Well, there's an inherent problem with medical education in the United States today, and that physicians are uneducated, meaning that they're highly educated, but their education is so focused that they're uneducated about the broad implications of natural products medicine and nutritional therapies, and most physicians are really, by definition, ignorant of cannabis and ignorant of nutritional therapies and herbal therapies in general.
How do we change that paradigm?
Oh my God, that's the $10 trillion question. Well, number one, you have to ask yourself, who is building new wings on medical schools? Until cannabis companies start building wings on medical schools, nobody's going to listen to them, right?
Yeah, because it all comes down to money, unfortunately, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, you go to Anschutz Medical Center here, and you're going to see the Pfizer wing, the Merck wing, the SmithKline, Glaxo, Beecham, whatever their name is now, wing. You're not going to see a Lidwell wing on the Anschutz Medical Center, are you?
Not in today's world. Not in today's world. But we're going to change that. You and I are going to change that, and with a variety of other companies.
Yeah, I mean, that should be our goal. I mean, as an industry, we will benefit from greater medical and scientific education. But it's going to be difficult. I mean, as an industry, we're coming out of the black market. And as a result of being in the black market for so long, there's a lot of dark, I don't want to say dark forces, that sounds evil, but people in clandestine industries learn to do things in very resourceful ways, right? Yes. And so they don't always follow methods that would lead to higher education. And so now that we're out of the black market, it's time for the cannabis industry to really focus on good science and education.
So where do we start with that education? With nurses and physicians and just general population, because I would think that we would have to educate that very differently.
Yeah.
In your opinion, who do we start with?
Me.
And what do we educate? And what do we start educating on?
So, number one, we need to start educating physicians and other healthcare practitioners about the basic pharmacology of cannabis. Number one, how about edibles? I mean, how many physicians could you go to and trust if you had a bad experience with an edible? Would you go to your doctor for that?
No.
Why?
No, because I believe hardly any of them know anything about it. In fact, I was just at a meeting the other day, and the physician was so against marijuana that there was a CBD company that was trying to push their products. He won the raffle ticket, and he wouldn't accept the gift because he didn't want anything to do with it. So I pulled him to the side after the meeting, and we sat and we talked about the physiology. And then he's like, oh, maybe I do need this, because his specialty, what he wanted his specialty to be, was in diabetes. Mm-hmm. So tell us the science behind diabetes a little bit.
So,
and how cannabis helps.
Well, there's a number of, when you think about, let's just focus on type 2 diabetes. I'd love to go to type 1 diabetes and the autoimmune, but most people don't even get that. So let's be very simplistic and just stick with type 2 diabetes. I think everybody understands that type 2 diabetes is clearly diet driven. You eat too much sugar and you're going to get type 2 diabetes. I think people pretty much get that today. Maybe more so than their doctors do. And so the progression of pathologies that goes along with type 2 diabetes are neuropathy, blood sugar sensitivity, insulin sensitivity. All of these things add up to long-term damage. And cannabis has actually been shown, and specifically delta-9 THC, has been shown to modify how our adipose tissue handles glucose and how our adipose tissue handles the transport and storage of fat. And those two, the handling of glucose, insulin sensitivity, and the transport of fat are three of the primary issues with type 2 diabetes. And then the big I, inflammation. And if you ask any doctor on the planet of any discipline, I don't think that there's a doctor on the planet that would disagree that inflammation is the hallmark of every chronic disease. And so the fact that cannabis can address the metabolic issues with type 2 diabetes, and there are multiple pathways in which cannabis influences inflammation. I think that's the big kicker, is inflammation.
Yes, when I went to nursing school, and it wasn't until I actually went back and went to school in functional medicine, did I really understand the importance of inflammation from a disease standpoint. Yeah. It was briefly touched upon, but we didn't learn about the nutrition, the different inflammatory foods, the different environmental toxins, the stress levels that cause inflammation, that we're, constantly doing what we don't, as a society right now, a lot of people don't contribute that to inflammation, and really that is the basis of inflammation. How does cannabis overall help inflammation, and because I know you're into genomics and specifically nutrigenomics, how does that come into play with, with diabetes, inflammation? How are we understanding the genetic component with this?
So first of all, you have to understand the backbone of the endocannabinoid system is the same backbone as the pathways that are targeted.
Okay, we had a computer video glitch there, and so we got cut off. So where we were in the podcast is I was specifically asking you how nutrigenomics come into play, and the genomic component comes into play in the cannabis industry. I'll let you take it from there.
So I think that for a general audience, the best way to frame this is within the framework of the class of drugs known as NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. I think most people with a consumer level education understand the relationship between aspirin, ibuprofen, Vioxx, and Celebrex. Those are all moderators of pain, inflammation, and fever. And I think that people have a pretty good understanding of how that system functions in terms of disease and health. I think people you take a baby aspirin and it influences inflammation, but also influences clotting. And that system is known as the eicosanoid system. The eicosanoid system is a system of homeostasis moderators that are derived from fatty acids. And I think that that's the part that people kind of have a general understanding of, because that's a connection with omega-3 fatty acids, as you know.
Yeah.
And so when you think about the role of omega-3 fatty acids in cardiovascular health, neurological health, people get that omega-3s are healthy. And here's the mind-blowing thing. That system of eicosanoids that are they're modulated by aspirin and ibuprofen, that system is the same chemical structure that the endocannabinoid system is built upon. So there's fatty acid mediators that are pulled from our cell membranes that are converted into molecules that mediate pain, inflammation, fever, GI motility. Our immune system is modulated. Our neurotransmitter function is modulated by these molecules known as endocannabinoids. The key is they're all built on a fatty acid architecture. And so our diet is the first place. So one example of this in terms of genomics and how this relates to inflammation, there's a gene that encodes for an enzyme known as it's a fatty acid elongation enzyme.
Okay.
That I won't say the biochemical name because it won't mean anything to anybody, but just recognize that it takes our dietary fatty acids and it elongates them, and then it can modify them again. So it takes dietary fatty acids and converts them into EPA and DHA from fish oil.
And those are so important for your hormones.
Yes, absolutely. And so when you think about inflammatory tone in the human body, the major driver of inflammatory tone in the human body is that balance between the omega-3s and the omega-6s. But the omega-3s have to be converted into EPA and DHA. The omega-6s are easily converted into arachidonic acid. And so arachidonic acid, you can think of that as the inflammatory pain, fever mediator, and EPA and DHA are anti-inflammatory. They're soothing to the cardiovascular system. They're soothing to the bronchial tubes. All of the things we associate with inflammation, like cardiovascular disease, asthma, those inflammatory pathways are all pushed by omega-6 fatty acids and arachidonic acid. And they're slowed, the inflammatory and pain and fever side of that is slowed down by EPA and DHA.
What I find really interesting in that, and a lot of people do know this, is that cannabis needs to be in a liposomal, some type of lipophilic. It's like it needs to be in the lipid.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons there's a connection here. Yeah. And I know a lot of people know that, but they don't understand the connection that you just explained. So fascinating.
Well, and here's the thing is I talk about CBD and THC as fat-soluble nutrients, like vitamin D. What does vitamin D do? Vitamin D is a fat-soluble nutrient, right?
In my opinion, it's one of the major hormones in your body.
Yes, exactly.
But I know a lot of physicians don't see it that way because they're not trained that it's a hormone.
Right. Well, and
Yeah.
there are still physicians that think that vitamin D is toxic.
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
You can get too much and get rickets and yeah.
Oh, let's not go down that
Okay.
rabbit hole.
Yeah, let's not go.
Because my soapbox for that one is miles high.
Okay.
But when you think about a dietary fat-soluble nutrient, all of our fat-soluble nutrients are absorbed through little particles that are known as chylomicrons. Chylomicrons are what our bile produces in our gut. So when we eat a fat-soluble meal, our endocannabinoid system senses that in our tongue, and it sends signals to our liver and our gallbladder, and in the liver and gallbladder, it says, okay, we have fats coming. It sends, I'm not starting over just talking about that. But this is something that I actually do in my talk, is if I'm doing public speaking, I'll put up a picture of chocolate mousse. And what happens when you see a picture of chocolate mousse?
I can taste it.
Yeah.
I can taste
and that's
it.
an endocannabinoid mediated process. So your body is using its own endocannabinoid system to prep for proper digestion. And so what that does is stimulates your body to release bile, and the bile creates these little, like detergent spheres called chylomicrons. And the chylomicrons are what absorb all fat, whether that's vitamin D, vitamin A, EPA, DHA, fat-soluble toxins like mercury or pesticides, or hormone, all of the hormone analogs that we get in our diet from plastics and all that garbage. That's all absorbed together non-specifically in chylomicrons, and the chylomicrons are liposomes. So when you talk about liposomal technology, it's mimicking our chylomicrons, how we absorb fat. When you think about human breast milk, that is the first liposome that we experience. Because what are the components of breast milk? There's fat, there's sugar, there's protein, there's a whole bunch of other things, but they're encapsulated, the fats are encapsulated in liposomes. Because they're not water soluble. Because it's a mixture of water, fat, and sugar, and protein.
So I've talked to several different companies because I know your preference is an isolate, a CBD. When we're talking specifically CBD, is an isolate versus full spectrum versus the liposomal technology that is out there. So tell me why your preference is for each one, or where they fit in.
It's product specific.
Okay.
So there is a place for isolates. There is a place for distillates. There's a place for full spectrum. From a product development standpoint, full spectrum extracts are challenging for product development.
I talked to a different chemist, I'm going to add in here, because I talked to a different chemist because he's like, in science, we've been really good at studying 1 to 2 different molecules. And then he's like, when it gets 3 or 4 different molecules, it gets pretty hazy. And then you're looking at the cannabis plant, and the cannabis plant has like 200 to 300 different molecules, and we're getting 1,000 different results that are probably unknown.
Yeah.
So is that coming into play with what you're saying here?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I think about product development from the different forms of, refined cannabis extracts, I prefer a full spectrum because I believe in ancient plant wisdom. I believe in shamanism. I believe that the plants have energetic qualities that are refined out as we refine the plant products more. So my first choice is not an isolate.
Okay.
But I believe that there's a time and place for isolates in product development. So here's one of the things with the cannabis industry as a whole, and when I say cannabis industry, I mean THC and CBD. Sure. I don't differentiate them because I'm not the federal government and I don't hate you. I want you to be happy. I want your endocannabinoid system to be fully functional. And so I don't differentiate cannabis and hemp. They come from the same plant. The only difference between cannabis and hemp is the breeding programs that got them to where they are. I mean, it's the same plant. And so I lean more towards full spectrum because there's so many of those molecules in there that are beneficial. But I always think back to my mom. When my mom was diagnosed with cancer at 87 years old, Number one, she didn't want to have anything to do with marijuana because it was the devil's lettuce.
Yeah.
She didn't want to go to hell.
Well, there's a lot of people in that age frame that feel that same way.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's more just because of the education and what they told it what it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my mom was born in 1924, and during World War II, she taught in a one-room schoolhouse. She, and she was of that culture that what her doctor told her to do was the only thing.
Yeah. Yeah, we're shifting. We're shifting away from that. Yeah.
But in order to make that shift, we have to develop products that are acceptable to those people that are not cannabis friendly. I say that
and that's where the CBD isolate comes in.
Yeah. When I work with a lot of different CBD containing products and THC containing products, and the number one complaint that I hear from new users of cannabis products is, well, I don't like the flavor. And I go, wow, how could you not like that delicious flavor?
Because it's a natural flavor, it's earthy, and my thing is they're just not accustomed to it because we'll put high corn fructose into everything.
Well, and I'm not the person to consult about flavor because I eat raw kale.
Yeah.
I like natto.
Yeah.
I put nutritional benefit way ahead of flavor. If it's bitter, I don't care. Because I know that typically bitter plants contain alkaloids that benefit us in some way. Nutrient-dense foods don't taste like high fructose corn syrup-dense foods.
No, you just made me think of like Ayurvedic medicine because they go off of bitter, astringent. They go off of those flavors, and I just think our palate has been so refined to sugar that we have lost sight. And I know specifically for myself. When I've ate healthy, then I've went and tried to come back into America. I've been away from America for a while. Came back, my taste buds changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
My flavors changed.
And that's the thing is, if you eat a diet of bland, non-vegetable food, which is a standard American diet, white bread, feedlot beef. I don't like feedlot beef because I grew up eating pastured beef. Feedlot beef doesn't taste right to me.
No, it doesn't. I agree with you because I was raised with cows too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The fact that it comes on a diaper in a styrofoam container with saran wrap. No, meat comes in butcher paper. That plastic stuff is not for me. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's just how I grew up. I was fortunate enough that I spent a lot of time on a pre-Monsanto 1,000-acre farm in Nebraska. In that pre-Monsanto world, food was different.
Yeah.
And so when you think about people that are eating, white bread, feedlot beef, weird potatoes that are genetically modified not to bud,
Or the shelf life is there for 2 or 3 years and
iceberg lettuce. I mean, how many people specifically seek out spicy arugula? I think, I'm maybe the biggest consumer of arugula and kale on the planet.
And because nutritionally, how do they benefit you?
Well, number one, kale is probably one of the best sources of vitamin A. Most of the vitamins that you need are in kale, with some exceptions. I mean, here's where, I'm not going to rip on the vegans because
you're going to get in trouble if you do that.
Well, that's not my message. My message is not to point the finger and say you're wrong.
Yeah.
But there are some nutrients you just can't get from plants, like B12.
Correct.
There are sources, there are forms of B12 that are produced by plants. And here's the catch, is previous lab testing for B12 used to use a bioassay and I don't know if this is even still in use today, but when I first started to get into food nutrition and biochemistry, I learned about the methods of analysis of nutrients in food. And it used to be that the standard for B12 was a bioassay that used a bacteria, and the measurement was turbidity. Because when you put any form of B12 into this solution with bacteria, the bacteria would grow, and as the bacterial population would grow, less light would pass through the solution. That's what turbidity is.
Yeah.
And so our previous food measurement of B12 was using a bacteria. Well, B12, the core of B12 is a molecule known as a coronoid with cobalt in the center. The coronoid is similar to hemoglobin, and there are multiple coronoids in nature. We can only use the higher level coronoids, whereas bacteria can use a broad spectrum of coronoids.
This is interesting because I was just talking to somebody else about bacteria and the cannabis plant and how it fed into, in his opinion, it was going to lead into the next broad spectrum antibiotics, just because of how the plant is by itself, because it helps create the bacteria to grow.
Yeah.
Expand
So,
on that.
Well, number one, I mean, you have to think about the soil. The soil that the plant grows in needs to be microbe diverse. There's a number of beneficial soil microbes that are absolutely essential for healthy plants. And this is the biggest problem with factory farming, Monsanto style, is they're killing microbe diversity in the soil, which is killing the soil. When you think about the human microbiome, we can measure hundreds of thousands of different bacteria in our gut now because of DNA technology. I mean, think about when we were kids. What would happen when you get sick? You send you to the doctor and they do a throat culture, right?
Yeah.
If they even did that. Usually, we did a throat culture when you were 5, we'll just send you an antibiotic now. So, the vagus nerve comes from the brainstem and it innervates all of our organs like that. And the vagus nerve is a two-way signaling system. So you've heard the term "worry yourself sick."
Yes, I have. Yeah.
There's a reality to that. The vagus nerve can influence the permeability of our gut lining, and the vagus nerve can influence the population of bacteria in our gut. And so when you think about the role of the endocannabinoid system and cannabinoids, go back to our basic understanding of the neurobiochemistry of the endocannabinoid system. The endocannabinoid system is a retrograde feedback mechanism for neurotransmission, which means it's like the anti-lock brakes for your central nervous system.
Which is really, really unique because most things are not in a retrograde
Correct. Correct.
method.
Yeah.
I don't know if I don't know. I think cannabis was the first time that I had heard that.
Same here.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what that means is in our central nervous system, we have presynaptic neurons and postsynaptic neurons. And I like to use the idea of a node, in a fiber optic system. If you're a computer engineer, you know this. So the way that fiber optic cable works with our internet service is we have, the internet service provider has a fiber optic cable that goes out into a neighborhood. And within that neighborhood, there's a node. And what the node is a box of switches. And so it gets a signal from your internet service provider and it switches that signal to you if that packet of information is addressed to you, right? Mm-hmm. So if I send you an email, it goes from my computer to the internet service provider to the node in your neighborhood and then to your house. Your central nervous system works in a similar manner, where the node is the synapse. So you have a presynaptic neuron and a postsynaptic neuron, where the presynaptic neuron is where the signal comes from. So if it's a dopamine signal, if you do something that makes you feel pleasure, you're going to have a dopamine signal coming down that presynaptic neuron. And then the dopamine is going to be released from the presynaptic neuron, and it's going to bind to dopamine receptors on the postsynaptic neuron. And if you keep that pleasure experience going, it's going to eventually burn out that neuron. This is why things like video game addictions can be bad, because people just get into this cycle where they just need more dopamine. What the endocannabinoid system does, it's a retrograde, meaning it comes from the postsynaptic. It releases a signal that goes to presynaptic and slows down the transmission of dopamine from the presynaptic. So it's kind of like a feedback mechanism that keeps the neurons from burning themselves out. And this is why, guess who has the patent on the neuroprotective effects of CBD?
The U.S. government.
It's like a bad Scooby-Doo episode. I mean, I'm like waiting for Old Man Withers to come out from behind the amusement park and take off his mask. And my plan would have worked if it wasn't for you pesky scientists telling the truth.
Yeah, but they've had it and they've hid it since the 1980s.
Oh, it just kills me. I mean, this is my big frustration as a scientist, is we live in a world where CBD containing products are supposed to have less than 0.3% THC. Well, number one, that's a fictitious number that they made up. It means it has no scientific relevance whatsoever. Let's just pick a number that's going to irritate people. So CBD is a Schedule 1 substance. Do you know the DEA criteria for scheduling drug substances?
Oh yeah, it has to do something with impairment. I don't know what specifically you're going after.
So number one, a Schedule 1 substance must have a high potential for abuse. That makes sense, right? Heroin.
Yes, of course.
Heroin has a high potential for abuse. Schedule 1 makes perfect sense. Number two, that substance should have no medical benefit. Heroin, high potential for abuse. Heroin has no medical benefit, so it fits, right?
Yeah, but a lot of times people, that's what they thought about the marijuana plant. I mean, now we have a lot of science to back that up, but going back, go back to your grandmother that we were talking to earlier. That's the information she was fed.
Yeah.
That there was no scientific data, there was no medical benefit, and it gets you high. And there was an addictive, and it destroys brain cells.
And it's the gateway drug to heroin.
Yes. And all other drugs.
And so when you think about, okay, the Center of Disease Control, or pardon me, not CDC, it's Department of Health and Human Services. The Department of Health and Human Services, a branch of the United States government, owns the patent on the neuroprotective effects of CBD. And they name specific pathways. They name the NMDA receptor system and the AMP receptor system. The NMDA receptor system and the AMP receptor system are inherently linked to neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's and ALS and all of these horrible things that are growing in today's population. And another branch of our government, the DEA, says that CBD has no medical benefit. And now the FDA has approved 2 CBD-containing drugs, Sativex and Epidiolex. So now we have 2 different government agencies that have contradicted the DEA's definition of CBD. So why is the DEA not changing their definition of CBD and rescheduling it?
That's a very good question.
Please, somebody, there's no scientific logic behind it. So it's because they hate us and they want us to be miserable. And it's because, quite frankly, they don't want to deal with cocaine and meth. You know, marijuana and CBD, that's low-hanging fruit. Those people don't have guns and they're probably happy, so they're not going to shoot back.
Oh, I see what you're saying now. Okay, so let's talk about no addictive qualities in the marijuana plant. How do people, when they do get high, CBD counteracts that? CBD can make them unhigh. Explain the physiology there.
So CBD and THC. Well, let's go back to the endocannabinoid system.
Yeah. Okay.
So you have to understand that we are hardwired for pleasure. Right?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, who doesn't like to feel good?
I am.
And so one of the first endocannabinoids that was isolated is a compound called anandamide. I call it arachidonyl ethanolamide, but people don't like that.
It's too hard of a word to say.
Right? And well, you know the Sanskrit root of ananda is bliss. Yeah. So anandamide is the bliss molecule. You can't feel pleasure without anandamide. And so when you feel pleasure, your body's releasing anandamide into your neurotransmitters, and you feel good.
And I read that with the anandamide is actually 10 times stronger than THC.
Yeah.
The THC that gets you high.
Yeah, absolutely.
But THC converts exactly into anandamide.
Well, THC binds to the same receptor site.
Okay, thank you.
They compete for that pleasure receptor site. And so here's the thing is, we need to feel pleasure, right?
Yeah.
I do. The thing is, our endocannabinoid function is based on our genetics, right? So some of us produce more anandamide than others. And I refer to that, and I don't remember if this was an Ethan Russo quote, but I think it was Ethan Russo coined the term endocannabinoid tone. So if you have a high endocannabinoid tone, you produce more anandamide than somebody with low endocannabinoid tone. And so
is that genetic?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that's where I was going, is I just recently did my Endocanna Health profile. So Endocanna Health is the 23andMe of cannabis. And we have to get you connected with Len May and Endocanna Health.
That sounds fascinating.
It is. I mean, here's the thing is we now have the ability to run a genetic test to determine what strain is going to be best for you. And I hate the word strain, so we're going to say what cultivar or what chemovar.
Okay.
And it's based upon your genetics. So I genetically produce less anandamide than other people do. And so I'm on the low endocannabinoid tone spectrum, which means that I can do more THC on a regular basis than most people can tolerate. Like my wife is high endocannabinoid tone, so she's like the one that wakes up, 4:30 in the morning, bing, happy and smiley, and I'm the one, oh God, smash the alarm clock for an hour and grumble until I get 26 shots of espresso. And she's not a really positive responder to THC.
Explain this test a little bit more. We know like 23andMe tests the 23 chromosomes. I know there's nutrigenomics tests out there that test like 51 of the different genetic type. How does this cannabis, what is it testing? How many is it testing?
So 23andMe is a genetic sequencing company that uses a platform known as the Illumina platform. The Illumina platform is a rapid sequencing technology that will take your DNA and sequence a type of mutation known as a single nucleotide polymorphism. Mm-hmm. We call them SNPs. So 23andMe scans your DNA for 750,000 known SNPs. That's a lot of data.
That is a lot of data.
And so where we're at in the genomics world right now is we have way more data than we have answers. So we're just scratching the surface on this, but there are a few really well-characterized SNPs in the human genome that tell us really definitive information about things like how we metabolize drugs, like for THC as an example, the gene for the detoxification enzyme known as cytochrome 2C9, or 2D9. Cytochrome 2D9 is what's known as a highly polymorphic drug. So, or highly polymorphic gene. So if we have 5 people in the room, probability of each one of those people is going to have a different genetic variant of that gene. And there's ultra slow metabolizers of drugs, there's slow, there's intermediate, there's ultra fast metabolizers, intermediate fast. And so this is the problem with edibles, is when you eat delta-9 THC, you're going to, the delta-9 THC is absorbed in your chylomicrons with all the other fat-soluble nutrients, and it goes to your liver with all the other fat-soluble nutrients. Well, what happens in the liver is what's known as first-pass metabolism. So the delta-9 THC is converted into a metabolite known as 11-hydroxy. And here's the thing is, delta-9 has a relatively predictable outcome in most people's biochemistry. Most people are going to feel relatively good from delta-9 for about 3 hours. Mm. And the onset of action of delta-9 is pretty predictable in most people. 11-hydroxy is all over the map. Some people feel like they are dying from 11-hydroxy THC. Okay. And that's why we have a new diagnosis in emergency rooms here in Colorado. The new diagnosis is temporary marijuana-induced psychoses. Because when you are one of those genetic variants that doesn't tolerate 11-hydroxy-THC well, and you overdo it on edibles because some bud tender told you, hey bro, eat two Chiba Chews, that's what I do. Well, sorry, that's poor advice for anybody.
Well, I know because I have that specific gene, and for me, I don't process pharmaceuticals. That I need to take more of a natural substance for my body to be able to respond to it. Like I can take a Lortab and be knocked out for 48 hours.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work in my system.
Yep. And this is the direction we need to go. And this is why I love working with Indocanna Health, is because what they're doing. So Indocanna Health, I say that they're the 23andMe of the cannabis industry. And so right now, Indocanna Health is doing the same type of genetic sequencing that 23andMe is doing. But Indocanna Health, their focus is on the endocannabinoid system and what is going to lead to the best outcome in terms of THC to CBD ratio, and what combination of terpenoids with your THC and CBD ratio is going to give you the best cannabis outcome based on your genes.
Well, I look forward to the research, and I hope that company really succeeds.
Yeah, they're killing it.
Let's talk about your company, or new adventure you're on.
Okay, so the liftoff so my new venture, we're called Technica Botanica, and my business partners, Micah Gross and Orlando Vidali, and I, we've been working together on a big THC and CBD project out of California together, and we started working together as consultants for this big mega company in California, and as a result, we just liked working with each other, and as we worked more with each other, we just decided, well, what are we going to do when this project is over? And we decided what we're going to do is we're going to start our own company. And so what Technica Botanica is we are three guys, two biochemists and a branding guy. And so we combine my experience as a drug design chemist, my experience in cannabis analysis, and Micah Gross is our other biochemist. He's got experience in fatty acid extraction with CO2 technology. He's done microbiome work. He's done work in product development in the nutraceutical industry. And so he's got a lot of nutraceutical operations, but he also has this crazy side where he's done work in tissue culture in cannabis. And he's worked with a big edibles manufacturer here in Colorado. And so we bring together this, and Orlando.
Well, it's a combination, a diverse skill set, a diverse people, I guess I should say, that you guys bring to the table. That's a